Soundtracks are one of the most important parts of a theme park. They play a really important role in the overall feel of rides and themed areas. Without them, theme parks would lose much of their magic and feel like a ghost town. Soundtracks also play into nostalgia, which is a nice feeling when you haven't ridden Vampire for a few years and come back and act like you haven't seen Marcel in a decade. Anyway, today we're ranking UK theme park soundtracks from worst to best. There's a lot to get through, so let's dive right in. As of scripting and editing this video, the majority of you guys said you wanted every soundtrack to be ranked in this video. You guys don't know how much of a headache your decisions gave me. Don't worry, if you enjoy the video, that's all that matters. Here's how it will work. We'll start at 75 and work our way up to the number 1. The ones near the bottom aren't that great, so I'll go through those pretty quickly. But the higher we get, the more time I'll spend talking about them, since the best soundtracks deserve a proper spotlight. Oh, and there were also some soundtracks that I couldn't find, so I obviously can't be ranking them, so here's a list for reference. Starting off at 75, we have the Adventure Carousel at Chesington World of Adventures. Cute enough, but it's super repetitive and not really memorable. At 74, it's High Striker at Thorpe Park. Fun soundtrack, but it loops so fast you barely notice it before it starts again. At 73 is Hex at Alton Towers. It's distorted and eerie, which suits the ride perfectly, but I wouldn't choose to listen to it outside the park. 72 is Ostrich Stampede at Chesington. Mostly ambience again, but I actually like this one slightly more than Hex. At 71 we have Saw the Ride at Thorpe Park. Again, mostly background atmosphere and just a hint of subtle music here and there. 70 goes to Rita at Alton Towers. A bit more musical than the last few, but still very much on the ambient side. At 69 is Amazoo at Chesington. This one actually is proper music, light, fun, and definitely the best so far. And at 68 we have Blue Barnacle at Chesington. Not sure if it's technically a soundtrack, but the ride cycle fits okay. Just not really my vibe. At 67 is Rush at Thorpe Park. A bit more ambience, a little music, but still nothing to go crazy about. Coming in at 66 is Miranda's Mayhem at Alton Towers. The music fits the ride, but honestly, I'm still not a fan. 65 goes to Barrel Bailout at Chesington. Very repetitive and kinda dull, but hey, it's a kids ride, so I'll let it slide. 64 is Heave Ho at Alton Towers. Seriously, what is it with me and repetitive soundtracks? 63 lands on Trawler Trouble at Chesington, another seaside themed track in a row. It's not bad, it's just not my style. 62 is Mr. Monkey's Banana Ride at Thorpe Park. Honestly, I don't like this one. It's funny for a minute, but listen to it for more than 5 and you'll go insane. 61 goes to Treetop Hoppers at Chesington. It's very similar to Mr. Monkey, so it can't climb any higher. 60 is Sea Dragons at Chesington. Definitely better than the last two, though still a little bit repetitive. I survived lapping it 5 times as a kid, so it can't be that bad. 59 is the Smiler at Alton Towers. Honestly, I'm way too scared for my dreams to listen to this one. The creepy laughing is just too much. The fans out there, I'm really sorry, but the only reason it's not lower is that it really does fit the ride quite well. 58 is Big Easy Bumpers at Thorpe Park. The music is kinda funky, but honestly it's still pretty meh. 57 goes to Detonator at Thorpe Park. Way too cheerful for such a scary ride, but I can't say the soundtrack is bad, it's just a bit off. 56 is Sea Storm at Chesington. Hands down the best seaside soundtrack so far, so yes, still very repetitive. 55 lands on Flying Fish at Thorpe Park. Now this one's perfect. Intense, energetic, and totally fits the ride. It's full of crazy helixes and near illegal ejector airtime. I know that joke is not getting old yet. 54 is Double Tea Party at Thorpe Park. The soundtrack's okay, but wow, it is very repetitive. You get the point quickly. 53 goes to Depth Charge at Thorpe Park. Or maybe it's the Flume soundtrack, who knows. Either way, it's quite repetitive, but it still has a nice groove which works. 52 is Ghost Train at Thorpe Park. The queue is slow, but the music fits perfectly. Not overly repetitive, and the ambience really sets the mood. 51 lands on the Land of the Dragons at Chesington. Some parts of the soundtrack don't quite match the theme, but it's not repetitive, and overall it's quite pleasant. 50 is Elmer's Flying Jumbos at Chesington. Yeah, it's a bit repetitive, but less so than some of the earlier ones. Plus, the tune is really cheerful and fits the ride quite well. 49 goes to Storm Surge at Thorpe Park. Country rock on a water slide. Weird choice. But putting that aside, the soundtrack isn't too bad. 48 is Tiny Truckers at Chesington. Similar vibe to Storm Surge, but I actually like this one a tiny bit more. Can't have 2 rides tied at 49, right? 47 lands on Alton Towers theme, specifically the entrance theme. There are plenty of other tracks, but this one works so well. It's not too repetitive, and it really sets the scene as you enter. 46 is Cursor Alton Manor, Alton Towers. The soundtrack fits the vibe perfectly, and has a creepy edge, but the creepiness keeps it from ranking any higher for me personally. 45 goes to Tomb Blasters at Chesington. Now we're getting into the good stuff. This one has a nice mix of instruments and sections, so you really feel like you're listening to multiple soundtracks while queuing. 44 is Samurai at Thorpe Park. Some might call it repetitive, including me, but the repetition doesn't really stick while you're in the queue, thanks to the Ride Cycle soundtrack. It's more of a personal opinion at this point. 43 lands in The Walking Dead The Ride at Thorpe Park. A few repetitive moments, but overall it stays fresh while queuing, but is played a little bit too loudly in my opinion. 42 is Battle Galleons at Alton Towers. Nothing groundbreaking here, but honestly I quite like it. It does the job. 41 goes to Oblivion at Alton Towers. This one always makes me laugh. It's so different from all the other Alton Towers tracks. Like, are we queuing for a roller coaster or heading into a nightclub? 40 is The Runaway Mine Train at Alton Towers. It has a nice upbeat soundtrack that's genuinely enjoyable, and not even that repetitive, thank goodness. 39 lands on Skyride at Alton Towers. Who knew cable cars could have such a good soundtrack? It fits Alton Towers' overall theme so well, and it's surprisingly pleasant to listen to. 38 is Spinball Whizzer at Alton Towers. Tell me I'm not the only one who hears Mario Kart 8 Deluxe vibes in this. Fun and upbeat, though I think it could get annoying on a really long queue. 37 goes to Safari at Chesington. I like the more natural, atmospheric style of this one. It's the kind of soundtrack I really enjoy. It doesn't have much variety, so yes, it's a little bit repetitive, but overall, it's very solid. 36 is Shipwreck Coast's area soundtrack at Chesington. I like how it blends Chesington's main theme with its own unique twist. Easily the best seaside-style soundtrack on this list, and it would have been higher if I already didn't have so many other favourites. 35 lands on Rattlesnake at Chesington. I can't explain why I like this one so much. It just gives me nostalgic vibes, especially remembering riding it at sunset with a friend. It's not repetitive, which is always a win. 34 is Griffin's Galleon at Chesington. Now before anyone yells at me in the comments, this isn't a seaside soundtrack. It's the Land of the Dragons, got it? Good. Anyway, it's got a nice mix of sections, and for a kid's flat ride, Chesington really nailed it here. 33 goes to 13 at Alton Towers. I'm not usually big on creepy soundtracks, but this one works really well. It starts with ambience and builds intensity, which I can imagine fits the queuing experience really well. 32 is Amity at Thorpe Park. I believe this also covers Stealth and Tidal Wave, so those won't appear separately. The WWTP radio is a brilliant idea, and it makes for a very fun soundtrack. But let's be real, some of the segments are very annoying. Luckily, it's long enough that you can avoid the worst bits, but I can't put it any higher because of that. At 31 we have Gangster Granny the Ride at Alton Towers. Did you even know that this ride existed? Me neither. But the soundtrack is actually really good. It has a nice spy theme to it, but it's quite repetitive. 30 goes to Croc Drop at Chesington. I don't really understand why loads of people like this soundtrack so much, because it's not the best. But to be fair, it isn't the most repetitive, and it builds a nice atmosphere and fits the theme really well, while also being quite entertaining, which ticks all the boxes for a perfect soundtrack. At 29 we have the Gruffalo River Ride Adventure at Chesington. This soundtrack is beautiful, and like Rattlesnakes, gives me a strong sense of nostalgia from when I was younger and rode this ride. Even though it's been rethemed since Bubbleworks days, it still reminds me of waiting in the station during a breakdown back then, which is funny considering it was a completely different theme back then. At 28 we have Wickerman at Alton Towers. Like Croc Drop, I personally don't like the tune to this, but it ticks all the boxes again, and I do enjoy it a bit more than Croc Drop as well. Hang on, scratch that. Listening to it now, it's a lot better than Croc Drop in my opinion. At 27 we have Quantrum at Thorpe Park. Funnily enough, this soundtrack reminds me a bit of Mandrill Mayhem's Station soundtrack, which, spoiler alert, is next on the list. This is another really good soundtrack, and the first for our Lost City rides. It's not repetitive, and also just really fun all round. At 26 we have Mandrill Mayhem's soundtrack. Who would have guessed? At Chesington. It's not as good as the Wild Jumanji soundtrack in my opinion, but still really good. It works really well with the ride's ride cycle as well, which is always a bonus. At 25 we have Zodiac at Thorpe Park. Although it's not my favourite ride, the soundtrack is really nice, although I do wish it was a bit louder in the queue because I can't recall hearing it the one time I queued for it, resulting in quite a boring 30-minute wait. As for the soundtrack, it combines Lost City's mysterious vibe with almost futuristic ones. I might be talking rubbish there though. At 24 we have Mexicana's soundtrack at Chesington. Like a lot of soundtracks that have recently come and the ones that will come, I quite enjoy this soundtrack, and similarly to Shipwreck Coast's one, it combines Chesington's theme with its own perfectly, which, while in the theme park, creates a nice flow between areas. Personally, I enjoy the tune and the overall feel of this soundtrack. At 23 we have Tiger Rock at Chesington. I really like the adventure vibes that this soundtrack gives off and the whole theme of it. It made my 5-minute wait for Tiger Rock that actually turned out to be more of an hour and a half not as boring as it could have been. As for the actual soundtrack, it's got a variety of parts while sticking to the same sort of theme, so you can listen to it for a while without starting to get bored. At 22 we have Vampire at Chesington, and I'm specifically talking about the station soundtrack here. Marcel is the absolute best live performer to ever perform music in a coaster station, and on top of that, the soundtrack hits nostalgia hard. It was the first large-scale roller coaster I ever rode, which makes it extra special for me. At 21 we have The Swarm at Thorpe Park. The version I put in the playlist for this video actually turns out to be the one played at the park's entrance, so I'm relying a bit on my memory here. From what I remember, the soundtrack is really good, except for the radio part. Honestly, I'd rank it higher if Thorpe Park went back to just the music without the radio overlay. At 20 we have Vortex at Thorpe Park. The soundtrack is really nice, combining a sped up version of Colossus' theme with its own. And even though I'm personally quite scared of this ride, the music is so good that it might just bring me back to it someday. At 19 we have Nemesis Reborn at Alton Towers. It's an intense soundtrack, which is part of what makes it so good. I personally prefer it over the old one, plus the original wouldn't fit in nearly as well after the ride's rehaul. I can only imagine how amazing it must sound in the actual queue, right next to the roar of B&M track. Coming in at spot 18 is the one and only Go Jetters Roots to Zoom ride at Alton Towers. The best soundtrack on this entire list, guys. Ignore the fact that we're only at 18, this is number 1. Brushing my slight overreaction to the side, the Go Jetters theme is quite good and certainly hits nostalgia's sweet spot from when I watched the show as a kid. And 17 goes to Jungle Rangers at Chesington. I just really love jungle themed soundtracks. I don't care if it's technically a kid's ride, it's actually pretty good. Sure, it's a bit repetitive, and yes, it does say, look at that beautiful baby elephant. But sometimes a great soundtrack doesn't need to be statistically perfect to be enjoyable. Jungle Rangers is definitely one of those cases. Now 16 might be a bit debatable because I don't know what soundtrack is right for it, but I picked Congo River Rapids at Alton Towers. The one that I found is a nice upbeat jungle vibe, and we already know how much I like them. It isn't that repetitive, which is always a nice bonus to a good soundtrack. At 15 we have Toxicator at Alton Towers. The first time I listened to this soundtrack, I wasn't entirely sure about it, but after a few more listens, it really grew on me. It perfectly matches Nemesis Reborn's intensity and easily ranks as one of the best soundtracks at Alton Towers. At spot 14 we have the Jungle Area soundtrack at Thorpe Park. Surprise surprise, it's another jungle soundtrack, who could have guessed? And please tell me you know by now how much I love jungle tunes. This one has a lot of different sections, some of which are quite similar to Nemesis Inferno's, which will appear later on in the list. Overall, it's just a really nice soundtrack, calming to listen to, even if you're not at the park. Coming in at spot 13 we have Galactica at Alton Towers. This one's a little less intense than Toxicator and Nemesis Reborn, which is nice for a change, but not so much that it fails to hype you up. Oh, and it reminds me a bit of a soundtrack coming later on in the video, but I won't give any spoilers. Anyway, this soundtrack is actually really long and doesn't repeat much, which you all know I love. Overall, it's a great soundtrack, just unfortunate that it misses out on the top 10. At 12 we have Chesington's themes. This soundtrack brings back so much nostalgia from when I was a little kid, back when Skyrail was still there. And being my young self back then, I used to confuse it with the music from the soft toy I fell asleep to. Looking back now, it sounds nothing like that. But guys, I was like 3, don't judge. Anyway, back to the soundtrack itself. It's light-hearted, uplifting, and really hypes you up for a day at Chesington, which is probably why it's fittingly called The Call to Adventure. And you can't tell me the isn't iconic. I just absolutely love this soundtrack. Nearing the top 10, we have 11, which is going to go to Wild Asia soundtrack at Chesington. Rest in peace. I honestly think I like Chesington more was focused on adventure, not IPs. First we lose Scorpion Express to Paw Patrol, and now we're losing the entirety of Wild Asia, along with its amazing soundtrack, to Minecraft. I get that an Intamin Multiverse coaster will be a cool addition to the park's lineup, but honestly, that could have gone where Scorpion Express was, rather than replacing one of my favourite lands in the park. Okay, sorry, I'm getting a bit off topic. The point here is that the soundtrack is incredible. I could literally listen to it on repeat for hours. It strikes the perfect balance between ambience and melody, which works beautifully in the land's atmosphere. It's so calming too, which probably explains why I managed to wait in Cobra's queue for half an hour while it was broken down without losing my mind. Truly one of the best soundtracks of all time, and one that will be missed but never forgotten. 10 goes to Thorpe Park's theme. Do I even have to explain this one? I only went to Thorpe Park for the first time a little over a year ago, but somehow this soundtrack already feels incredibly nostalgic. It honestly is just one of those soundtracks that instantly gets stuck in your head in the best way possible. Out of all the theme parks across the UK, this one easily takes the crown. It captures the energy and atmosphere of Thorpe Park perfectly. The main melody is so comforting and recognisable, and it's cleverly woven into lots of different Thorpe Park soundtracks. My personal favourite version that solely focuses on that tune though has to be Epic Sunset. There's just something about it. It's relaxing, uplifting, and full of end of the day vibes. And honestly, as much as it can feel a little sad walking out the park after an amazing day, this track makes it so much easier. It almost feels like the soundtrack is telling you, don't worry, you'll be back. It's simple, it's iconic, and it's an absolute classic. Easily one of the most memorable park themes in the UK. Nine goes to Dragon's Fury at Chessington. I know a lot of people have said they can't find this soundtrack for the ride, and honestly, I was the same. In one of my first videos, I even mentioned that I couldn't track it down. But then a friend pointed me towards the right one, and as soon as I heard it, it instantly hit me with so much nostalgia from my first ride when I was 7. I still love this soundtrack just as much today, and I can't wait to get back on this amazingly fun roller coaster while enjoying it in the queue. What makes it even cooler is that, even though it's originally from a game, it somehow fits the ride perfectly. It has this modern, slightly Nordic vibe to it, which works brilliantly with the whole theme. Honestly, these top 10 are ridiculously close in terms of quality. It's getting harder and harder to rank them because they're all that good. But Dragon's Fury absolutely deserves this spot. 8 goes to Rumble Rapids at Thorpe Park. This soundtrack is criminally underrated. It's got a jungle theme, which, let's be honest, already gives it a head start for me. But on top of that, it's insanely catchy. What more could you possibly want from a good soundtrack? Oh, and what makes it stand out even more is how well it's structured. There are lots of different sections, so it never feels overly repetitive, and it blends ambience with the music perfectly. It gives you that relaxing, adventurous vibe while also keeping the energy up, which suits the ride's atmosphere so well. And honestly, as I'm scripting this, I'm literally bopping up and down in my seat. That's how good this soundtrack is. One of the most underrated gems at Thorpe Park, without a doubt. 7 is probably not what you were expecting. With me saying it's river rafts at Chessington make me right? Yep, I'm not serious. I really like the soundtrack. But here's the weird part. For some reason, every time I listen to it, it makes me think of a locker room that's broken down. And I have no idea why. Like, I don't think it's ever broken down while I've been there, yet my brain still makes that connection. It's just one of those random, unexplainable things. Now, as for why I enjoy the soundtrack so much, there are 3 big reasons. Number 1, it's jungle themed, which is already a huge win for me. Number 2, it's very upbeat and cheerful, giving it a fun, lively vibe. And number 3, despite being so lively, I actually find it really calming to listen to, which is a rare combination. Obviously, you might not agree with me on this one, and that's totally fine, but personally, I really enjoy the soundtrack and absolutely earns a place at number 7. 6 goes to the World of Jumanji soundtrack at Chessington. This one's so lively, energetic, and just an absolute joy to listen to. It instantly takes me back to standing under the entrance, watching Mandrill Mayhem twist and roll overhead through that incredible inline twist. The music perfectly captures the adventurous vibe and makes you feel like you're right there in the middle of the action. Honestly, just listening to it fills you with energy and makes me want to jump up and head straight to Chessington. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that, to be fair? The soundtrack captures the adventurous vibe of the land so perfectly that it almost feels like it's calling you back to the park. At this point in the list, though, these soundtracks are ridiculously close in quality. It's getting harder and harder to rank them because they're so good. I've only just realised I said that like 3 rankings ago. 5 goes to Nemesis Inferno at Thorpe Park. I really enjoy the jungle vibe of this soundtrack. It's upbeat, energetic, and yet still manages to sound mysterious at the same time. If there are giant trees and rivers flowing around the queue line, I swear you'd instantly feel like being transported straight into the Amazon warehouse. The Amazon rainforest. Like the World of Jumanji soundtrack, this one fills me with so much energy and excitement every time I listen to it. It perfectly captures the adventurous, untamed feel of the ride and makes waiting in the queue feel so much more immersive. And of course that is honestly so iconic in my opinion. It's just that kind of detail that sticks in your head long after you've left the park. 4 goes to the Lost City soundtrack at Thorpe Park. Look, I don't know what it is about this area, but it just feels so immersive with the soundtrack playing. Seriously, if it wasn't constantly blaring out the speakers, the whole of Lost City would feel so much more emptier and nowhere near as atmospheric. The music really brings the area to life and ties everything together perfectly. I'll admit, this one doesn't have those classic jungle vibes I usually love, but honestly, neither do all the other remaining soundtracks on this list. There's also so much variety throughout that you can listen to it for ages without it getting old. On top of that, it has this light-hearted, uplifting quality that makes the whole area feel vibrant and exciting. Without a doubt, this is one of the best UK theme park soundtracks you can listen to, and it completely transforms the atmosphere of Lost City into something special. 3 goes to Colossus at Thorpe Park, which funnily enough is located right in the Lost City area. The soundtrack itself is actually very similar to Lost City's. In fact, the main tune is used quite a lot in that one. But for me, Colossus' soundtrack edges just slightly ahead for one big reason. It's so much more iconic. There's just something about it that sticks with you long after you've left the ride. Personally, it's extra special to me because Colossus was the very first ride I ever went on at Thorpe Park, so every time I hear the music, it hits me with a wave of nostalgia. 2 is a soundtrack that I didn't even know existed until about a month ago. And that soundtrack is the Hyperion soundtrack, aka Hyperia's shop music. I really like this one. It's very similar to Hyperia's main soundtrack, but it's a little less intense and way more calming. For example, if Hyperia itself was an entire theme park, this would be the music playing as you're leaving in the evening, strolling through the car park while everyone slowly heads home after an amazing day. It just has that perfect end-of-the-adventure vibe to it, relaxing, atmospheric, and surprisingly emotional. The soundtrack is honestly so good that I fall asleep to it at night, which is not weird at all, right? Right. And as for its quality, it's packed with different sections, making it the second least repetitive on this entire list, and it's also the second most light-hearted and memorable overall. So now, I guess the real question is, what could possibly top this at number 1? And finally, we've made it to number 1, which will obviously be Hyperia at Thorpe Park. This is without a single doubt in my mind the best theme park soundtrack in the entire UK. It's on a completely different level from everything else. This soundtrack is the one thing that somehow makes queuing for this coaster enjoyable. And honestly, if the queues ever hit 6 hours again like they did on opening day, you'd actually be in luck. Hyperia's soundtrack loop is about 20 minutes long, so you'd only have to listen to it about 18 times in a row. And the crazy thing is, you'd still be perfectly happy doing that, because it's just that good. It's not repetitive in the slightest, and it's packed with different layers and has the perfect balance of lightheartedness and epicness that keeps you hyped from start to finish. I listen to it on repeat all the time, and somehow I never get bored of it. That's when you know a soundtrack is something special. And don't even get me started on the nostalgia this track gives me, especially the ride cycle version. I can quite literally close my eyes while listening to it, and feel like I'm back in Fearless Valley. And we made it to the end. This video took a really long time for me to make, and has been in production for over 2 weeks, so please consider subscribing. In fact, it took 2 weeks alone for me to plan and script it. I've left a link to the playlists with all the soundtracks in this video in order from best to worst in the description and in the top right hand corner of the video. As per usual, all footage and audio used in the video aren't mine, have been credited in the description. Please consider checking out some of my other videos because there's plenty more coaster nonsense on the way. Thanks so much for watching, and I really appreciate it. Until next time, catch you later.